Okay. Uh, oh, and let me just start my presentation and share my screen. And here we go. The stream should be up. You should be seeing the Discord channel right now. So we'll wait for a few minutes, not a few minutes, sorry, a few moments for people to come into the stream. Okay, it seems most of you are in. Alrighty then. So yeah, welcome to another APT Monday talk. We're starting to revive this series now and hopefully get some more interesting talks for you as time goes by. And this time around, we are going to be talking about Death and Taxes, or namely I am. If you don't know me, my name is Oitmadi Sosolit. I am a independent game developer working at a lot of places actually, but mostly I'm associated with two game companies in Estonia nowadays, Placeholder Gameworks, which just shipped Death and Taxes, and Lootbox Studio. So today I will talk to you a little bit about how Death and Taxes went, what it is as a game also, what we wanted to achieve with it, and how has it been ever since it got released. So I would also like to shortly define the term post-mortem. Most of you are already familiar with that, but we might have some new people here. So a post-mortem is basically a post-launch assessment on how the game performed in terms of personal, business, and creative goals. So yeah, without further ado, here's Death and Taxes. The defining idea behind it is that it's a narrative video game about being the Grim Reaper on an office job. So what does this mean? Death and Taxes has been developed in various countries. We've had people work in various countries, live in various countries, and it's an international collaboration of, well, I would like to say game developers and also artists. In this game, you play as the Grim Reaper, as Death, in a bureaucratic office setting. You have to choose which people live and which people die each day when you enter your desk at work. The choices you make are going to shape the world around you, and you have several options on how to end the game, on how the world will exist after your deeds in 4 weeks of in-game gameplay. Just had a short drink, sorry. The game is mostly centered around a narrative structure which explores themes of death, mortality, and immortality in a satire and comedic setting. So the game, it doesn't take itself too seriously. And this is something to take into account as I proceed through the talk, because this is a lot of the design philosophy of Placeholder Gameworks is about not taking oneself too seriously. So here's a very simplified timeline on how Death and Taxes got made, in terms of, yeah, well, when it got made. At the end of 2017, the creative director of the game, Lena Gunnap, she had an epiphany, basically. She had a great idea in all caps and quotation marks. She had an idea on how to make, or rather, the purpose to make a game about being the Grim Reaper on an office job. I would rather leave the explanation of this creative process up to another talk about this, which hopefully Lena will give in the future. And I will move on to the next stage. So The game has been transformed over time from an idea to a palpable, tangible object. And this process has been going on for a while, actually. It only recently ended when we released the game, but the game has gone through multiple iterations of itself. It has had a very different, definitive versions of it made, and each of them carried a different execution of the same kind of vision. So in late 2017, after the napkin sketch was made, the pre-production for the game kind of officially or unofficially started. So that meant that Lena took her ideas to different people, to different organizations where she could try and flesh out more of the projects. One of these organizations was game camps, organized by the Baltic Game Foundation, if I'm not mistaken. And this was a game jam. And in that game jam, there was a prototype made, a first actual, like, fleshed out prototype of what the game loop should be. And between that and the next year, the game still transformed over and over again to different versions of itself. The world was being built, the environments, the art style, the characters were all being defined, and it turned into more and more of a solid idea. Entering the next year, June 2019, the pre-production in that sense now officially stopped because the project went into full production, which meant that people are working on it, they are doing it full time, and there was a release date also set. A good idea of when your full production cycle starts is when you have a definitive release date. Don't take Cyberpunk 2077 as an example, please. By that point, there was a thesis made about the game, again by Lena, in her uni. There was a demo made for the game. There were more people joining the team. That's when I joined, for example. And I brought some friends with me. And the team was expanding, the idea was being more fleshed out, and it was being made, the game was being made. So not half a year after this milestone, a new demo was also produced, and most of the game was already being done. So the flesh, the meat of the game was done in about 5 months' time. In December 2019, with 3 months to go until the release, well, 3.5 technically, but we'll see a little bit later on how time doesn't actually matter and how it does. We began the final push. Now this might be kind of considered the crunch phase, but it's also important to note that we didn't necessarily crunch as much in terms of hours as we did about more like thinking about the game and being in it. So the last 3 months or so was basically nothing else in our lives who were making the game, at least full time, nothing else had that much space. So that was the point where we were laser focused on making the game as good as it could be in its current state and form, and polishing it, doing the final content, and also trying to figure out how are we going to target it to our audience once the game releases. Now, the timeline doesn't stop when your game releases. The timeline keeps on going. And this is the fun things with post-mortems. You can make a post-mortem in one moment in time, and it's going to be completely different in another. So fast forward to Halloween, which was just a couple of weeks ago. It was literally right now, uh, and we are in present times. At this point, a lot of interesting stuff has happened with the game. It's been practically 9 months since it released, and I would be happy to tell you about how everything has been going and uh, yeah, what the game is, how we got here, and what's going to come next. So let's talk a little bit about what Death and Taxes is supposed to represent, uh, and how the execution of it expresses this. First, let's start with the people. As I mentioned before, Lene Gunnap, the creative director of the game, came up with a game's idea, and she had the final word with every creative decision in the game. Uh, and it might sound harsher than it is, but basically, she was just more of a guide, and there was not a lot of like, no, you can't do this, or yes, you should totally do that, but more of an encouragement. And we'll talk about a little bit about that later as well. Then Raidokikas, the main concept artist besides Lennon, who did basically all of the line work for the game. Then Kadri Gunnabu, who did some initial writing on the game and then continued to be a writer. Also, from top left to bottom right, these are in chronological order of the people joining. Then comes me. I joined as a programmer and also as a manager or a producer or person who organizes things, that kind of thing, and also social media manager kind of. Then after me, I brought along Mortem and Markus Rondo from Disco Elysium, basically. I gave them another challenge to work on, and Morten led the entire writing team, and yeah, Markus was another writer on the project. Then when Lena and I moved to Sweden to Spelkollektivet, it's a game development house situated in Sweden where game developers live and make their games. Then we bumped into a dude from New Zealand called Adam Bow, and he became the composer for our game. Then, even though Douglas Pennant had previous contact with the game and Lena specifically, we only asked him to join when we had figured out all of the characters in the game, and Douglas voiced the main antagonist in the game called Fate. And he set the tone both literally and figuratively for the game's dialogue for us. So it's not just being voice talent, it's also, yeah, bringing attitude and design into the equation. Then the second, our voice talent. The game is fully voiced. There's no line of dialogue that isn't without voice, unless it's just something that's descriptive. Every spoken line is an audio file that you hear in the dialogue. And we started out with just 3 characters, with Douglas's Fate, Isaac's Mortimer, and Bonnie's Conscience. Later on, in a content patch, we added 7 more voice actors and had a reprisal from a few previous ones, like Isaac and Doug. And this was created for... we did that to voice 7 new characters we created for our Halloween content patch, which I will also come back to later on. The world of Death and Taxes is based on fantasy realism. It takes place in a modern, familiar world in modern times, but time itself in that particular world doesn't have much meaning. Without spoiling too much of the game, there's not a lot that is like an anchor to you in that time, because you are experiencing people and dialogues and conversations in several points of time during this decade, after it, before it. So yeah, it's more like a chaotic soup of time that you're kind of navigating through. Then Fate, the main antagonist of the game, is also the keeper of world order, and they are an let's say an office bureaucrat who's part of what's called higher management. So that means there's also highest management, who are entities or concepts that are also beyond the actual fate of mankind. The action happens in Fately Towers, an office building complex in Cosmopolis City, which is actually like a pocket dimension where the laws of physics don't really work the way we're used to. And Fately Towers itself is an immense, complex structure, or rather, it's kind of like a living being in a way, that houses all the Grim Reapers for all the different things that exist in the world for all sorts of life. So that's kind of the mythology behind this game. The style is defined by heavy watercolor visuals. So everything you see has this sort of kind of painterly and handcrafted style and thick outlines. The main style, or rather the main stream of style, is Art Nouveau, but there are several different schools of art and also cultures that have affected the overall design philosophy of the art style here. For example, yeah, film noir, ancient Egypt. There are themes from various religions. There are themes. There's symbolism from different cultures, etc. And one of the most important things to note about the art style is that it's a tricolor style with black and white included. The main colors that are used in the game, the main hues, are teal, yellow, and red. And you will see this everywhere, even in this presentation. Everything else that isn't in one of these hues is just black and white. And this is inspired by old comic books, whereas if you would have to print these old comic books, then the printers only had a couple of colors that they could use. So it was difficult to kind of convey interesting visual variety with just the colors. So a lot of work gets put into all of the other details, and colors are used to contrast and draw attention. And that's exactly what we're doing all over the game. This is prevalent in everything, in every point in the visual design. So what is Death and Taxes? So here are some anecdotal statistics about what actually makes up the game that is Death and Taxes in terms of assets, in terms of content. We have in the game over 600 unique profiles of people that you have to choose whether they live or die, each with their own name, portrait, occupation, and short description, which is around 50 to 100 words, I think. Yeah, that's a lot. And all of these profiles have been handwritten. None of it is pre-generated. All of it has come from one or multiple people in our team. We have dedicated writers who come up with all of these profiles, and then our lead writer also comes up with some of them, and then also takes the time to edit all of them for consistency. So as you can imagine, that takes a lot of work. The game itself is extremely content heavy in terms of, let's say, mechanics to content ratio. Uh, there's a lot of variety in the content itself, but limited interactivity. So we'll get back to that a little bit later as well. The game features 28 days of content that pass in a linear manner. So you start at day one, and then week by week, you pass the days until 28 days have passed, and then you will get to the conclusions. But it's important to note that each of these days may have a variation of how the dialogue pans out, of what you're supposed to do during that day, and general narrative arc wise as well. And there are 109 variations of these 28 days in total. And what I mean by variations is that you will experience 28 days at a time from a pool of 109. And some days are static, they do not have any variation, but some days can have up to 5 different variations of what you will see during that day in terms of the content. Not only the dialogue, but also profiles. The game features over 100,000 words, around 104,000 even, that are exposed to the player, and a couple thousand words outside of that. This includes all of the dialogue for all our different characters, all of the profiles, and all of the text, all of the rest of the text that you see in the game in terms of UI or UX. The game has 11 fully voiced characters, if my math is correct, it should be. And or is it 10? Well, either or, it's in the ballpark. And all of these characters combined have over 2,700 voiced lines. And this isn't words, it means lines. One line can be several sentences, it can be one sentence, it can be one word. So you can imagine that the actual voiced words of the game is a multitude of voiced lines. So that's quite a lot of voiced content, and we are very happy to have that because it helps bring out the characters that we have written into the game way more, and it gives a sort of sense of presence to the player as well, that they're listening to stories, that they're listening to situations that are playing out, and they have the agency to change these because of the choices that you take in the game, either during the gameplay and also in the dialogue. The game also has 31 collectible items, each with their own unique visual representation and also at times gameplay mechanics. Around a third of these, so around 10, have completely unique gameplay mechanics, which also may or may not affect the way you play the game and the information you get from the game about how you are doing. We have over 120 visual customization items for the player to express their creativity and choose an appearance for themselves. And it's it's a lot of art, but we used a lot of, let's say, shortcuts to also ensure that we would be able to give players the sort of choice of their appearance and that it would be meaningful, but also managing the workload so that we could actually pull it off. The game consists of 8 distinct and different scenes, which are different places in the office building that you will be interacting with. Each of these carries its own unique logic and its own set of characters. There are over 430 classes of code, with an I don't know how many lines of code. I haven't really counted it yet, and I think I will do it once the game is truly final, once we don't see that we need to add any code to it. And also, as a fun reference, there are 3 fonts featured in the game overall, one of them being handmade, which is based on Lena's handwriting. And this font you can see on Fate's letter, which is the instructions you get for each day in the game. What we use to make the game, and this is actually by no means a definitive list, this is just the base that we absolutely needed to use to make the game, and we don't count all the tools that the rest of the people who were working on the game, like voice actors, which they used to provide us with a finished work of their choosing. So there's actually more tools involved in the creation process of this game than just these. We used Unity as the game engine. We used specifically the 2019 version 0.4 with, and that's the current version of the game in Unity actually. And what I can say about using Unity for this kind of a game, it was great until it wasn't. Every game engine has their faults, and every game engine has their perks. In this case, the perks definitely outweighed the flaws, but the flaws still cost some development time that was accounted for, but probably could have been avoided. And not because the engine is bad or something, but just due to planning. We used Adobe Creative Suite, so that was the main tool of our artists to make the art assets, the 2D art assets in the game. We used Artisy Draft 3, which is a narrative design and writing tool for, well, I would say games specifically, but you don't have to be limited to that. You can use this for any sort of writing project actually. For coding, it was mostly done in Visual Studio 2019. It has Unity integration, it meshes well, you can debug there, yay, everything is great, as long as it's something that you can actually debug and something that's not in the engine. For audio design, we used Audacity most of the time. Again, I don't know what our voice talent used to process their voice files, their raw files, etc. And for design, a little bit of asset management and coordination. We used Google Docs and Google Drive. So it might look like a jerry-rigged solution, and that's because it is. We just used what was there just because it was convenient and everybody knew how to use it. Again, I will circle back a little bit to how we made the game a little bit later on in the talk. For video stuff like trailers and social media, we used DaVinci Resolve, which is a freeware program kind of, and Adobe Premiere because it comes with the Creative Suite. So dependent on the situation, like who was doing the video editing, then we used different tools. For analytics, we used PlayFab, which I believe is kind of owned by Microsoft, if not completely owned. We used this to create our weird achievement system. PlayFab is definitely not made for desktop games. It's mostly made for mobile games, actually, I think. But it had some functionality that was enough for us, and it was basically a hack. We used this service as a hack to get what we wanted. And yeah, Unity Analytics, mostly for playtesting. to see how people played our demos. And then finally, social media tools, Discord, Twitter, Facebook. These ones you probably know. If you don't, wow. Then Sendinblue, which some of you also might know, but I'm assuming most of you don't. It is a newsletter, let's say, service, or mass email service, or a spam service, if you want to call it that. Initially, we just used Gmail to send out our newsletters, but we at one point decided that Gmail is a little bit too clunky for it. So yeah, we just went for Sendinblue, which has a pretty nice free version. You don't have to pay anything to use their service in an unlimited way, and their feature set is very, very strong for the price they offer, which is 0. Of course, if you need to use it in a larger scale, then I would say consider paying a little bit to get all the services you need. Then an honorable mention here goes out to Keymailer, which I didn't list out here specifically. There's a lot to be said about marketing, and it's a completely separate talk. But we also used Keymailer to send keys to people to play the early access or the demo version, development version, and the full version of the game to influencers. So that's something you might want to have in your toolkit as well if you're intending to do influencer-oriented marketing. So why was Death and Taxes made? What was the core idea behind it? The idea of playing as a Grim Reaper in an office job isn't something that might readily pop into mind to somebody when they're first starting to make games or starting any sort of creative process. So I will paraphrase a lot of stuff from our creative lead, but here are the 3 main points. Firstly, death is still kind of a taboo. It's not really readily talked about. It's something that's accepted but not really celebrated, and people generally in Estonia as well are either uncomfortable or unable to express their feelings about it. And this was also one of the reasons why one of the reasons why the game happened was that our creative lead had their own specific and tough experience with death in their lives, as do many of us. And there isn't really a system around in either a lot of families or social circles, at least when you're Estonian, to deal with this. So the game is supposed to give a little bit of a safe space for players to play around with the idea of death in their head and what it means. What would it mean to have utter control over someone else's life that you do not know, that you have not seen, and your only interaction with them is a piece of paper detailing what they are like, and even that's subjective. What does that feel like? What would people use this ability for? Does it matter really how they use it? Do they have an impact? And what does it mean for their own mortality? Okay, so sorry about that. I will have to re-log in because the presentation crashed. Let me just quickly refresh. I'll just have to log in back. One moment. Meanwhile, I hope that you're all having a good time. Let's see. Okay, here we go. Who's a good little presentation? Let me just skip ahead a little bit. Ah, too far. Oh dear. Sorry for the flashing. Okay. So, what does it mean, and how are people going to live through that fantasy, having that sort of choice, having that sort of power? We like this thought experiment, and that's a lot of design that made it into the game as well. We wrote this into dialogue, we wrote this into the profiles, we wrote a lot about, let's say, individual agency. A little bit of existentialism, a little bit of nihilism went into this. There's a lot of philosophical theory that went into the background of the game, of making the game. And a lot of it was shaped by all the different people that we had in our team. Each of the people we had on our team brought their own worldview and philosophy into it, and influenced this core idea somehow. And one of the main problems that the game focuses on, especially in terms of moral ethics and philosophy, is the trolley problem, a utilitarian thought experiment where the main question is it okay for someone else to die for the benefit of the many, or as it's colloquially known, the greater good? This problem is in each and every one of these profiles that you get on your desk. And each of these profiles gives you a different flavor of the same choice. If you happen to follow the Facebook page of trolley problem memes or Reddit group or whatever, then you'll probably know what I'm talking about. If you don't know what the trolley problem is, I recommend you at least take a look at it. There's a lot of interesting discussion about this and utilitarianism in general and moral ethics. And it's something that has polarized the players of our game a little bit even. Again, put a pin in that. We're coming back to that a little bit later. Secondly, when this wasn't necessarily in the original vision per se, the original vision is still having the Grim Reaper in an office job and being in a light-hearted setting. But at one point, the lightheartedness turned into hard satire. So we parody and make fun of a lot of tough stuff in the game. There's, how do I even put it? There's no punch we pull, really. We don't really shirk back at bringing attention to things and bringing them up to discussion within the game, even if it's just between the player and a little tidbit of information. We've seen this from people who have played the game on stream, who have played the game when we are watching them play in a testing session, that they react very interestingly to the different sorts of humor we have and the different elements and executions of satire. The first and foremost concept that we satire is death. Of course, it's mortality in the context of morality. And we'd make jokes about death all over the place here. We also make fun of and satire or spoof a lot of concepts and preconceptions about death. We also poke fun in immortality and make it into a philosophical discussion as well. Like, what does that mean? And that this concept itself is also at the center of the conflict presented in the game. It is about immortality. It is about a situation where there would be no death. And what would that mean? What could that mean? We don't offer any answers really to the player. We offer them interesting thought experiments where they can make up their own mind. We also make fun of social and political systems. You can guess how that's gone for us. There was a very interesting choice that we made during the development of the game, specifically pertaining to the profiles that are made. As you can see from the current profile in the screen, there is a description of a character whose name is Maria Remarque. If you don't know that, this is also a satire of a famous writer. This name is historical. And we don't mention any gendered pronouns. So that's a fun fact. It's important to note that Estonian doesn't really have gendered pronouns. So inherently, Estonian is not a sexist language per se, and that's an actual term. There are sexist languages. You might be familiar with Russian or German, which rely heavily on this. And we decided that since the game was being developed in English, we would also try and go for a gender neutral approach when we are talking about the people you have to decide upon in the game. So there was a bit of backlash when we made this choice. Luckily, it was a very, very small yet loud minority of people who actually were disturbed by this. Snowflakes, one might say, who felt very attacked by this notion that there is a gender neutral pronoun in English that has been used for countless years. So that was an interesting decision that had some ramifications in terms of the reception of the game, but it was also something that we satired quite heavily in the game. Again, nothing like no holds barred, not really. Moving on, we also satired a lot of archetypes of different kinds of people, of different stereotypes, and trying to also turn them around a little bit. There's not a lot of stuff that we can do in the game in terms of this without it becoming too personal. So some of the profiles you see in the game are completely, let's say, fictional. Some are based on a group of people, some are based on specific people, but also not the same. So we try to see what kind of tropes of people we can see in real life, and then put these in front of the player and try to get them to decipher what that means for them. We also do satire of game development itself. There are numerous in-jokes throughout the game experience about what game development means, how it affected us as developers as well, even, and also just as kind of showing our attitude towards what we are doing currently, being self-aware. And we occasionally also break the fourth wall, but also not going to delve into that too much as it contains some heavy spoilers. Then two minor things that I still have to bring up is that we parody a lot of literature. We reference a lot of works of art, not only from literature, but a lot of it comes from that. And also religion. While we don't really explicitly bring out any sort of religious themes in the game or name any specific religion, because that's not the point really, we do let's say bring up the discussion of religion itself, of faith, in some little side plots inside the story itself. And being that, where did that take us? Death and Taxes has had a wonderful release, I would like to say. This game, its ideas, everything it stands for, and everything it conveys has been quite positively received. We are, yeah, quite well reviewed, I would like to say. All of the storefronts that we are on have a pretty good score, which keeps us happy because it helps people, you know, to decide to buy the game if it has a positive score. Mm, it also gave us the motivation to keep working on the game once it released, and also to kind of validate that you don't have to make a game that's part of a tried and true formula. Also, gonna come back to that. Uh, and you can try and be brave and be bold and take risks and still come out the other end with something in your hands, with something tangible, and not only just the game. There's the game itself started having a life of its own after release. We could see this most immediately with how much coverage it actually got, with how many people know that this game exists because they've seen a video about it on YouTube, because they've seen their favorite Twitch streamer play it. Uh, a lot of work has been put into Death and Taxes that simply isn't work that we put in. And at this point, it might even be that the hours that all of the core team put into the game is by far eclipsed by the amount of hours the community has been put in. And that kind of puts things into perspective, right? As creators, we kind of have some sort of impact and some sort of responsibility towards the people who enjoy our creations. And once we let go of this, once we released it into the wild, it just kind of took off. So that's an interesting thing to think about. The game performed quite well. It sold about 70,000 copies right now, as of today, but it's owned by around 900,000 people. And why is this the case? Because Death and Taxes was in a bundle for racial justice and equality earlier this year, and that was bought by more than 800,000 people. So a lot of people actually own the game, but not a lot of these people who own the game necessarily have played it, because there were a lot of games in this bundle. So that gives us another number. The total unique players who have played this game is around 120,000, with at least 32,000 of these players having finished the game at least once. A lot of the statistics show that a lot of the players, that's around, I think, 40% who finish the game once, also start another run. Not necessarily finishing it, we don't have the stats for that, but yeah, a lot of people also go for another run and play the game more. We also have over 1,000 reviews now on Steam. It's humbling to see, to be honest, especially considering all of the rest of the numbers of the metrics that we have. We're quite happy with how the game has performed. And also it's important to note that what we set out to create with the game, we also succeeded in creating it. The moral dilemmas that we brought up, the principles of the game, the art style, it has all been recognized by different people from different backgrounds and different websites in different countries. We have had at least 2 reviews of our game, or maybe even 3, in Iran. It's very random, but we made it into gaming news outlets in Iran for some reason or other. So that's interesting. And people come to us every day on social media, saying that this game gave them something to think about. This game made them think about death. It made them think about value of life, and that's basically all that we could have asked for. So uh, in terms of how we feel like the game actually did, it's been good. It's been actually very good, and not because it's been received well, not that, but mostly because we got people talking, and that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to have more of a conscious impact than a business one. So, continuing on from when Death and Taxes released, it's just taken a life of its own. As I mentioned before, we've had countless submissions of fan art and fan fiction, fan theory, people trying to figure out the world, people building the world, actually. We've managed to capture the players' imaginations just by having these very strong stylistic choices, and people find it acceptable, these choices, to follow them and create something in their own style with their own handwriting. It's Since Death and Taxes itself, its inspirations come from different works of art, such as Terry Pratchett books, from TV shows like The Grim Adventures of Bill and Mandy, from various games as well. For example, Animal Inspector and Papers, Please. Uh, a lot of people are bringing Death and Taxes into back into these different mediums as well. We've had a fan song kind of made from the game. We've had uh, people make various forms of digital art, drawings, paintings. Have They've tried their own hand at voice acting characters in the game or role playing as them, and it's just kind of odd to see, but it kind of does make sense because of the stylistic directions we took with Death and Taxes and how personal we made the player character itself. So people could always be that Grim Reaper they had in their head, and they can take this fantasy even further. Uh, and people use this role play as a form of continuing the game experience. It has turned our small but ultimately very active, I would say, community into creators themselves. And Death and Taxes has kind of transcended from being just a game and being its own separate little microcosm. There's people who know about it and people who are creating something out of it that's not really connected to the game anymore, but the overarching idea of being a Grim Reaper on an office job. Uh, we've had some implicit and explicit collaborations with different people, other developers, content creators. We had, as I mentioned, we had a fan music video made about the game by the Stupendium called Rest Employed. It's a great song. If you haven't heard it, you should. And some explicit collaborations as well, where we've bundled together with several other game developers, including Lucas Pope from Papers, Please, and having a bundle on Steam about narrative driven and choice focused games. So the world of Death and Taxes kind of still keeps expanding, not necessarily because we want to, but because, as I mentioned before, it's kind of taken on a life of its own. So, in the end, what actually worked out for us? There's a lot that I could say about this, and this is like the meat of the post mortem, so to speak. Most of what actually worked out that about the game was that everything that was made for it followed the original vision. Everything boiled down to this one catchphrase of being the Grim Reaper on an office job. Each piece of writing supported this fantasy. Each piece of art supported this kind of world that would that you could role play in. And everybody who joined the project brought their own vision into the equation as well. Just because the idea itself was formed in one person's head, uh, since the creative process wasn't really held back, it was actually encouraged. Everybody who joined the project was encouraged to bring out their own ideas when we were brainstorming something. Then everybody brought their unique morph of this game world into the table, and it became part of this greater whole. At first, it was just an idea in Lena's head, but now it's an idea of all the people who have worked with it somehow. And we were very happy to have this kind of a model, because that meant all of the people who worked on their project could express their own creative ideas through this freedom. So we had some ideas in the game that otherwise would have never made it there. In terms of maybe it's a theme in one of the songs we have in the game. Maybe it's a profile. Maybe it's a subplot of a profile. Maybe it's an item on the desktop that you can play with. All of this was possible because we didn't really hold anybody back, but everybody could refer back to the original vision, which was simple, concise, and easy to follow, so that people would actively get these ideas and wouldn't get lost, and everything that people kind of came up with would fit into the canon, would fit into the world building. The third thing that we I would say enjoyed, or had the luxury of enjoying, was loose management. So what do I mean by that? It means that every person who worked on the project managed their own schedules, but that didn't mean there wasn't any sort of timeline or direction. We, as a team, whenever we needed to, we sat down and set some specific goals for some specific time. And everybody could fill their own schedules so that things would be ready in this sort of a timeline. And whenever somebody needed help with that, we would discuss this again. In the end, it's important to note that Death and Taxes has actually not been really a full-time project per se. It hasn't been something that people work on in an office. It's a project that people work on when they have the time for it. Death and Taxes wasn't made because somebody had a contract telling them what to do. Death and Taxes was made voluntarily. Everybody who was on the project was putting in their own time in good faith because they liked the idea. Nobody was actually really paid per se, except for voice actors, and even Douglas wasn't paid in terms of, here, you take some money because that's how much we think you're worth, or your work is worth. But all the people who put in a sizable amount of their time into the game also carried a stake in the game, so they would get a percentage of the game's revenue as compensation. And this, coupled with this sort of loose management, meant that we never had to deal with the problem of people having to do something they really didn't want. Every, let's say, there were, of course, there's stuff that you like doing more than other stuff. But the important thing to keep in mind is that people work the best when they're not forced to do something that they truly do not enjoy. And if they enjoy what they're doing overall, then those nasty bits also become way more let's say, tolerable. Next up, uh, I didn't know what to call this point, so I just call it serendipity. It means that we made some decisions at the right time, in the right moment, but I don't mean that we were necessarily lucky. What I mean by this is that we felt like something would fit in the game, that would fit with the game world, either when making new features for the game or talking about it on social media. And then we just tried it out and saw that it actually worked. So some might call it luck, some might call it making an informed guess or an educated guess, but I would call it serendipity because it's something that you don't expect to happen, but it still happens, and just because you put the ball rolling. Next up is that a lot of theory that comes with making a game, making art, coding, marketing, etc. There's a lot of resources on how to do this, but Death and Taxes is an interesting case study for me personally because everybody who worked on the game put their own theories into practice, whether it was the art team or whether it was me coding, whether it was somebody writing, then it was done with a sense of awareness. Lena and I spent several months of watching game development talks and workshops consistently to try and extract any sort of relevant information that other game developers have said worked out for them, and trying to put that into practice. And we did succeed with a lot of this. For example, one of our biggest successes was having a demo for the game because it enabled us to get a lot of wish lists. That's really oversimplifying the situation, but that's kind of the cause and effect loop what happened. And we didn't get this idea in our own heads. We actually got this idea from watching game development talks and having like a calculated discussion on whether or not to have a demo. Initially, I was the one who proposed the idea of setting out the demo and seeing what happens. And Lena was not initially super thrilled about it, but then we did it anyway. That's what I mean with serendipity. It was something that just happened. And the chain reaction that happened there was that we put up a demo. It got picked up by a lot of interesting people, actually, a lot of interesting influencers. But it got also picked up by a pretty big YouTuber called Gray Still Plays. You might have heard of him. And that simply wouldn't have happened if we hadn't put out the demo. So it's hard to say, was it luck? Was it an informed decision? But it is safe to say that we wouldn't have made it so far if we hadn't have taken that kind of choice. We might have made it in a different way. Might have gotten here using different methods, but those were the methods that we thought were the best at the time. Then playtesting. Since we had a playable demo very early, we could manage to get people to tell us what they think is wrong with the game and what they think could be improved. I'm not going to stay on this topic for too long because it's kind of something that every game project should have a lot of. You should always play test, you should always iterate. It's something that kind of is a given. But for us, we got some really super valuable feedback that could, let's say, that definitely improved our future Steam score rating. If we wouldn't have listened to the people who played the game, we would have made it into a much more annoying experience. And we avoided that by having these people touch upon the game. And last but definitely not least, marketing. We had a plan for it. We put it into let's say, solid execution. We knew what we were doing. We were putting this theory into practice. And what happened was that we actually got some sort of coverage out of it, both from influencers, from news outlets, from social media accounts. We entered the public consciousness, as I said before. Now, the next part. Oh yeah, I will also briefly explain what I mean by some of the most important points here. First off, when it comes to executing upon the game's vision, what helped us was having a solid core and letting people put their own like secret sauce into it, which ended up making the game and the vision specifically more than the sum of its parts. Everybody had a core concept of the game, but everybody had a kind of a different take on it, and we didn't ban any of these different takes. We just had people execute their different takes in their respective areas, whether it was art, writing, coding, or music. Everybody put their own handwriting into the things that they were doing. Everybody had their own style, and it was still consistent because it fit the core vision. So we could easily expand the content of the game without losing sight of the original, most important aspects of the game idea. Secondly, I colloquially named this as work ethic. As I said, Death and Taxes has been a voluntary project. Nobody is actually like an employee, so to speak. We only contracted voice actors, but the rest of the people are shareholders in the game, basically. But in the game specifically, not the company, because we try to keep it project-based. So in this sense, everybody manages their own pressure, because everybody, let's say, has a different stake and a different personal motivation to work on the game. And how we made that work was that we synchronized our own goals with the goals of the rest of the team constantly. And I don't mean constantly as we did this every day, but we did this whenever we felt that there was a need to do it. Whenever we felt that the vision was not as concise, or when we just felt like it would be good to be on the same page again and then kick off and do a nice little sprint of work, and so that everybody would have the same idea about what we were doing. Then serendipity, I would say that if you do try new things that you think might fit into the game, it's not a guarantee that it will work. Almost all of the feature creep ideas we had for Death and Taxes made it into the game, but that's not necessarily a good thing, and it's not necessarily a bad thing either. The point is, as long as you keep trying new stuff that fits the core idea of the game, you can make it into a better experience. But you also need to know when to cut your losses. When you put something in that obviously doesn't work in the game, then it's time to let go of it, and quickly. And even though we can be lucky to say that we added a lot of features in the last few months of development, it worked out for us, mostly because everybody had such a strong sense of what the core vision was, and none of it was dominant in any way. It kind of just fit together harmoniously. And in this kind of situation, there's no such thing as luck. It's only about being informed. So only by informing all of the people involved about what the creative vision is and what the overarching idea of why we're making this game, if this is communicated properly, then it's not luck anymore. People are making their own informed decisions, and we might find them as fortunate, but it wasn't left to chance. For example, when we were working with our composer, we basically never had to tell him to redo anything, because we just sat down for a couple of times, told him what the game was about, and he was like, "Sure, I'll make a tune for you." And then he showed us his first piece of music that he wrote for the game, and that became the main theme. That was basically it. That's when we knew that we had found our person, because this, again, it's not luck, but we explained what the game was about. He translated it into his own language, so to speak, into his own internal understanding of what the game is, and he delivered something that fit with a core vision. And the ability to do this, to understand, to comprehend a vision, is quite important, especially if you're working on a collaborative project like this one. And it helped us out in multiple situations, in a lot of hairy situations, in terms of narrative design, audio design, and general game design. And then last but not least, I cannot stress enough how much it, let's say, it prepared us to make the game by looking at what other people had done. We played a lot of different games. We watched videos about how those games got made, what decisions they were taking, why. We made sure that we were, every time we would try to communicate with our future players, that they would be part of our target audience. We were aware that we wanted to provide supply to a demand that was there. And one of the best rules of business is that when you give people something they didn't know they wanted, so we probably got a lot of people who didn't know they wanted to play a game where they play as the Grim Reaper on an office job, but the core vision supported exactly that. And even though it's a niche of people, it's enough to reach, at least to get into the minds of these people and tell them that, hey, this game exists. And also, the design pipeline for us was very simple. We had an idea, we tried it out immediately, prototyped it, play tested it, and saw if it worked or it didn't. And if it did work, we decided to take it forward. If it didn't, it would probably get thrown out immediately, even if it was a good idea. It just helped us keep the core vision, again, kind of concise and pure, and make sure that we're delivering a focused type of gameplay. So what could have gone better? If you have questions on how long this talk is gonna go, this is like one of the last 3 slides, so just bear with me for a little while and then we're gonna be done soon. First up, the release could have gone a little bit better, because the game released with a few game-breaking bugs, and I was way too intoxicated to fix those on release day, so I had to fix them with a blasting hangover from hell on the day after. So that's something you should never do. Which brings me to the second point, actually, which is about coding. Basically, almost in every other aspect in the game, everybody was doing something with somebody else. In terms of pure coding, it was only one person doing it, and that was me. And while it's fun to code as one person, it also leaves you vulnerable to your own mistakes. So personally speaking, I don't think I would actually want to make a game again with me being the only coder, because I would like somebody to sanity check anything I'm doing. And even though coding alone can get things done fast, as I said, it's gonna leave you open to your own vulnerabilities and your own mistakes. So whenever something quote unquote bad happens, it might be troublesome just solving it on your own. Next, redundancy and contingency. Basically, uh, so we got the basic things covered, that the game project and all art assets, etc., are all saved in triplicate, so that if, let's say, there's a catastrophic failure with one of our computers, then we have a backup to go to once, let's say, yeah, if it ever has to happen, then we have a backup we can restore. And contingency, meaning that what happens in the case of an unforeseen event. The unforeseen event being either the departure of a person from the collaboration, or their death, or a creative difference. Uh, well, we didn't have any contingency plans. Basically, since the game was already basically made by volunteers, there, if something would have happened to somebody during the development of the game, it would have been extremely hard to replace them. And the game would still have probably somehow got made if one or more of the people from the team got incapacitated somehow. But that was basically a scenario that we hoped wouldn't happen. And we only had like one idea with it. If something does happen, then we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. So, yeah, if somebody got sick, which they did, or if somebody would somehow lose a lot of time from working on the game, which they did, we had no way of replacing that. And we just were reactive to whatever happened. And it worked out for us, but it came with a sense of insecurity. So I wouldn't recommend doing that. Fourth point, we didn't really plan out what we were going to do after release, except for fix all the bugs, obviously. So most of the bugs got fixed, and with some little bit of extra content by May this year. So that's already like half a year ago and 3 months after release. And then we were like, okay, we're done for now a little bit, and let's just see how it goes. But we also, since the game was doing well and was received quite positively, then we thought like, oh yeah, we should totally have a content pack, and then proceeded to not plan out any of how we would do that. We had no timeline, we had nothing. We just decided it's something that we would like to do freeform later on. And while loose management is great if you have a specific, let's say, time frame and a roadmap, and you know exactly what you're gonna do, then it works out. But even then, if you don't have a plan, things are gonna start falling apart. So what ended up was that there was a lot of unnecessary time spent in very unwise locations while making the game because it wasn't planned out. We crunched a little bit as well, and we just recently stopped with it. Bad thing again. So yeah, next time, if let's say, well, we did have a specific end time for this content pack eventually. We wanted to release it on Halloween, which was anywhere between like the 26th and 31st October, right? We ended up releasing on the 29th, I think. So yeah, but getting there also needs to be planned out. And we thought like, okay, so this expansion, it's just gonna be a small content pack with thousands of voice lines and a lot of new content. Yeah, right. Yeah, coming back to the main point, plan out whatever you want to do with the game, even if it's a small or a big update or anything in between. We also haven't really figured out what we want to do with localizations and console ports yet, even though we are on the Switch right now, and that's thanks to our Polish partners at Pineapple Works, who graciously did this for us. Next up, community management. We don't really have a dedicated person to running the community. We have a small community on Twitter. We have a larger community on Discord. Lena and I are just there to kind of run the server, but we're not really doing any sorts of massive activities there. It's just organic activity that goes on. And we have a couple of mods who have been in the Discord server ever since last year, ever since we released our first demo, ever since they cracked the demo and made it dance their own tune. So we have had some people there who have been with us for a long time, but we haven't really fostered any sort of growth. It's just something that we want to maintain as a place where people can come. So that's something we could definitely improve with, because we haven't had a plan there. We have some ideas what we want to do with the server, with our Discord server specifically, but it's whatever. We're just seeing how it goes right now, and trying to adjust if we have any interesting ideas, like organizing a giveaway or something. But still, every time we do, it's usually a shit show. Next up, mental health. This kind of circles back to post-release planning a little bit, and also release. So some things to consider is that when you're working on the same thing without a real break for a long time, and it doesn't just have to be working, it's just being in it. Like, even when I wasn't working on Death and Taxes, my life was Death and Taxes and was thinking about Death and Taxes. This kind of monotone can severely impact one's mental health. So that's something to keep in mind. Let's say more than one person from our team, without naming anybody, had problems with mental health during the development or after. And actually, well, yeah, it's been several members of the team, and directly or indirectly because of working on the game somehow, or just because of other things happening. So whenever there's a collaborative effort like this, it really helps to talk about things to your teammates, and it's just a part of a healthy relationship. Like, you don't have to be anybody's best friend, so to speak, but you can be their friend if you want to, especially if you're going to be spending so much time together. So this is mostly a cautionary point, to always kind of, monitor yourself, monitor the people around you, see how they're doing. One of the last and most important points: player expectations and knowing how to set them. Since this is not a super defined genre that we made the game into, in fact, I don't think there is a genre. There have been names proposed for this genre. The biggest term today is Tinder-like, so you make binary choices. The point was, a lot of the negative feedback we got from the game was that the game was definitely not what the people expected when they were playing it. And this gave us sort of this weird pathological dissonance, like thinking, how could we not have seen this? Because the description of the game is quite descriptive. The screenshots and the gameplay trailer are as well, and the long description in any of the storefronts too. So what's happening there? It's something that just comes down to the refinement of genres and design generally. It's something that can only be the risks of meeting player expectations can only be lowered, but you can never make players expect something specific with the attention they are accustomed to giving you. So yeah, there's been interesting and also weird feedback about the game, about what it tries to convey, and about what it's about even as well. Like, the game is about moral philosophy and satire mostly and about being the Grim Reaper on an office job. But a lot of people have, uh, like, I don't mean by percentage, but several people, in terms of absolute numbers, have completely and utterly missed the points of the game. And for us as designers, it's an interesting case study to see how they got there. So that's something that we will likely improve upon with the next games we make. And more importantly, actually, we don't know what could have gone better yet because we haven't actually sat down with the full team talking to each other and figuring out like what everybody liked and what they didn't. So this is why I'm calling this talk also a mini post-mortem, because I'm actually not talking about everything that's happened or everything that we've talked about. This is just what's happened up to now, being in the situation and not even having a solid retrospective. So this, what could have gone better? Well, I can probably give you a better answer next year. So some specific points as well, especially like about, yeah, some of the points I made before, but community management. We have a great presence on Twitter with the people that follow us. We are very conversational with people on Twitter, and we are conversational with game developers, influencers, so streamers and YouTubers, and voice actors, actually. So they're also kind of content creators. And last but not least, are fans. But that's not the main reason we use Twitter for. We mostly use Twitter to talk to other game developers and, yeah, influencers. Then Discord is going okay-ishly for what it is. We could definitely improve on that. And our community on Facebook basically doesn't exist. There's just, yeah, it's one of the places we've neglected the most. Honorable mention to our newsletter, which has around 280 subscribers. We really didn't funnel any people into newsletters. That's something that we would like to likely improve next games as well, but we'll see how it goes anyway. Then obviously post-release planning, like we didn't have too much of a detailed plan for the initial release either, but we actually did. Looking back, we did have specific time goals, milestones, when everything should be done, how it should be done, and we adjusted this plan as we went on. But for the post-release, we didn't even bother making a plan. We just had the release date and thought, okay, well, we just need to make these things for this date and it's going to be fine. Pro tip, it's not going to be fine. Like, don't do that. Still make a plan. Even if it's a shitty one, it's still a plan. It's better than nothing. We don't know what we're going to do with console ports. We're currently on Switch. We're thinking about Xbox and PlayStation. We'll see how that goes. And we are kind of working on localization with our Switch publisher. But it's, yeah, again, it's something that we just need to put in the time into and make it work somehow. Because we're running on a voluntary translation effort with our community, and we have a couple languages like kind of ready, for example traditional Chinese and Brazilian Portuguese, but they are not even nearly done to be put into the games, into the game or the different platforms of the game. So yeah, definitely something to improve upon. Then yeah, player expectations, man. How to tell people what kind of game they're gonna play when they buy your game is one of the trickiest things as a designer. We try to set the tone early, so in the game media, so screenshots, store pages, trailers, etc. And a lot of people latched onto the idea that this game is basically Papers, Please. Which is funny because if you want to have a direct comparison with another game, then no, actually, Death and Taxes is kind of a clone of Animal Inspector. and it's a much less known game than Papers, Please. Papers, Please has very different mechanics, but it has also entered the public consciousness way before Death and Taxes ever got made. So that presents a really unique problem, because even if we don't, even if, or rather, even if we do say and freely admit, we even have it written in our description on Steam that we are like Papers, Please, it's hard to get players to let go of that notion. So what's going to happen is that some people are going to come into this game expecting Papers, Please, and Papers, Please like mechanics, like the timer, like the various detective work you have to do. That's not the game. And how do you break that expectation? Yeah, that's a rhetorical question. I'm not going to answer that because I don't know how. It's hard to break player expectations, especially if they come hard set on the idea that they're going to play a game that they think is like this other game. So some people have, of course, played the game, coming in expecting Papers, Please, and it wasn't like Papers, Please, and they think it was the best thing ever because of it. Just because they didn't necessarily like Papers, Please, but they thought like the concept could be interesting if executed in a different way. And of course, when you try to have a solid take on humor in games, in literature, in cinema, there's always going to be somebody who doesn't get the joke. And man, we've had some people who don't get the joke on our forums, on our Discord, etc. And it's actually surprising how well people respond when you explain to them what the situation is about. But it's still, people come in with assumptions, and it's hard to win in that situation, so to speak, because they're always going to assume something different than you think they are. And the most important thing to keep in mind here is that never take any of this as criticism or an attack on your person, because if you do, you're probably going to respond to them in a negative way. But what you want to do in this case is to talk to these people who get these reactions openly and ask them what their problems are with the game, and don't even think about going personal there, because then you're just going to open the door on review bombing basically. And yeah, we haven't really had a true retrospective or a post-mortem amongst ourselves, but that's probably something we would like to do once it's been a year since the release. We'll see how it goes. Everybody's still like super stoked about the game. Everybody is happy that they worked on it, and that makes me happy too. And now, yeah, we're getting to the present, and soon the end of the presentation. We just released the Halloween update for Death and Taxes, which I've talked about a lot here. It's a content pack with new characters, and it's been performing super well for us. It has increased our sales, it has increased the reception of the game, more people are reviewing it, which is always nice to see. And people are generally enjoying the new content that we put in, and it goes in line with their expectations. One of the biggest things that we, let's say, didn't do in the game was that in a scene in the game, there is a vague representation of a bar, a place you can go to drink, but the players can never go there. So for the Halloween update, we decided, well, fuck it, let's just make a bar. And we did. And everybody reacted nicely there, because that was something that they expected, didn't get, but now did. So it's a win-win situation. That's one way of working with expectations that are already there about your game, but you now have the control over it. It's like a conversation with your community. You should always value that kind of moment. And going into a really quick and dirty conclusion, how the game has actually impacted us personally. So yeah, Lena and I, with Placeholder Gameworks, we have a runway of around 3 years with our current burn rate. So if we, and that's still increasing, uh, that's time we can use to maintain our current lifestyle and also hopefully make more games. We want to keep making shorter games in terms of both content and also uh, development time, so that we don't really break our bank making just the next game and then hoping it'll do just as well as Death and Taxes. It's nothing we can guarantee, so we're trying to take it smart. But the most important takeaway here for us is that we don't have to worry that much about where are we going to find work, because now making games is our work. Secondly, everybody who has had a stake in the game somehow has been compensated at least fairly for their time, even for now. The agreement is that revenue will be shared for the first year of the game's release, which is where most of the action happens anyway. Everything has already like begun to die down in any case, but we're still doing well. Thirdly, we've entered the public consciousness, which is amazing to see. We have, yeah, it's just weird. Seeing people know this game and we don't know these people. Uh, People know that they've heard something about it. So that makes our lives much easier as game developers later on in our lives when we're making more and more games, because this is like a springboard for conversations, for networking. Fourth, we have an amazing community with many talented creators in it who celebrate the game and its ideas with us. And they're overall just amazing people. People from our Discord, people from Twitter, people we know. Our publisher is super nice, the console publisher. And generally, like, we have a very positive community experience if you choose to enter. Then fifth, and one of the most heartfelt for me, is that we have empirical evidence that we have changed and more specifically improved people's lives from their own personal accounts with the game, from either the reviews they give, from what they come to tell us on our Discord, from what they post on Twitter or Facebook. Basically seeing that we have made somebody a little bit happier than they were previously, for a little bit richer for having experienced our game, is super empowering, I would like to say. And last point, sixth point, is that we got to do exactly what we wanted and we can continue doing so, which basically means that on most fronts the game has been a tremendous personal success for us. We can't retire on this game alone, but that's okay because we still want to keep making games anyway. And that's kind of what matters. What we wanted to show with this game is that you can make something that's off the beaten path, that doesn't have a big market, that doesn't even have a big reason to exist, but just enough so that you can still make it and people can experience it and have a good time and make a living out of it. So that's nice. Yeah. And that's pretty much it, actually. I can only say that working on this project personally has been worth it for me every step of the way. It's been an amazing time getting to know the people I've had the chance to work with and talk about the game with, and all the fans, all the players of the games, the streamers. It's just, yeah, I want to keep making game development. That's my takeaway here. I want to keep making games, especially being encouraged by a very loving community. And I hope that whatever I've told you right now will inspire you a little bit more as well to keep working on whatever you are working on, and maybe to engage with people who are working on something that you like, and even making fan art out of it or whatever, because I can tell you for a fact it's gonna make someone's day. It's going to improve someone's lives. So just keep on being creative, basically. And that's it. I give the stage to you, to everybody who's here, to anybody who wants to be here, and talk and ask me questions. So, yeah, okay, there's already one question by the Irv. So Irva asks, how and when did Unity let you down? So, I can show you. You can see my Unity screen, I hope. So this is the project. So there's this little thing that's like the main feature of the game, and it's called paperwork. So, paperwork is an interesting beast. It's basically every day on your table you get these profiles of people, and yeah, this this class or this prefab is being used in ways it probably shouldn't be. What it is simply put, it's a polygon collider in Unity, but it's also a canvas, and it's also an image element that's supposed to be rendered on a canvas, combined with a lot of text. And mind you, this isn't Text Mesh Pro, this is regular text, and a lot of more canvases and images and real world colliders. And the point is, I don't think this was ever meant to be used like this. It's extremely clunky what we did, because what we are doing in actuality, let me just mute the audio and show you what I mean. If we go into the game, come on. If we go into the game and we go to the desktop view, then we see this paperwork, and this is the paperwork class, right? So this is just an UI object in the game world, and it's part of the hierarchy in the desk here. I will show you what the hierarchy is. So we have this paperwork here, and it's a UI element. That's what it is. It's a UI element. And it definitely wasn't meant to work like this. So why did we use it like this? Well, first of all, to get this kind of effect where I can use a mask, a layer mask with images without doing a lot of shader work. And also to enable proper zooming and scaling of the text. And the rest of all of this in the table, like the fax machine, these numbers here, this is a text mesh. It's an actual game object. It's proper. It has a sprite renderer. Where's the fax? It has a sprite renderer, oh god, and a polygon collider, like a normal object would have. But this, no, this is a UI element. Like in this menu, it's like one of these. And what happened here was that I had to use a specific shader to make sure that I could use a specific material on this. So you'll see if I fax this, then it dissolves into here. And I couldn't really do it properly with the usual sprite rendering and the usual materials there. And I had to write a pretty weird shader to handle this blending in and out of existence. And what Unity did there was I wanted to do it as a gameplay object at first, but this shading logic that I would have had to use, and everything to do with text scaling and zooming and such, just it it didn't even work at one point. There were so many layering issues, and I would have had to make its own subsystem for this. So let's just say the traditional gameplay object hierarchy and inheritance completely fell apart for me. So the fallback was just to use this UI and actual game objects, 2D physics hybrid of a thing to make it work. Another question is, show me the RTC layout. Sure. So RTC is our writing tool, and let's just go from the top. So this is the main folder. This is where Death and Taxes lie, and this is where most of the game is organized. Let's just zoom out a little bit. Here we go. So all of this that you see in the middle here, this is the 4 weeks, week 1, 2, 3, and 4. So here you have this variation of these 109 days, and this is the narrative and gameplay, also gameplay design of the entire game. You start from here, and then you go through all of these day by day, and you end up here, and then the story ends and you get a conclusion. And additionally, we have some extra things like having an intro sequence, having separate game overs, having separate dialogues for separate characters. We have, there were some spoilers here, you didn't see those. And we have some different dialogue for the DLC too. It's definitely somewhere. I can show you the DLC as well. Bartender, just quickly. DLC bar. Yeah, here we go. Oh, oops. Yep. I missed it. So this is just the DLC. It has 8 bartender dialogues, and then 7 dialogues for each of the new characters that, or 1 returning character. 6 new characters and 1 returning character that we have. And each of these, yeah, is like just a dialogue. One moment. Or just a dialogue. So yeah, this is an example of one of the dialogues we have in the game. It has quite a few nodes. It's all voiced and it's all funny. So believe me, it's totally funny. So it's quite long. It's a lot of content. Okay, does anybody have any other questions? Or anything they would like to say? I don't know. I have been talking for a while now, so thank you for putting up with me. It's more than like 100 minutes or something. If there aren't any questions, then right now, then you can always feel free to talk to me on Discord here, or send me an email. You can find my email pretty easily. Okay, I have a question. How did you manage assets? Our asset management headquarters is Google Docs or Google Drive. That's where we categorize most of our stuff. Project of Death. So this is where we have most of our stuff, different things. All of these have multiple subfolders, of course. This carries all the concept art. This folder has been made in like 2017, I believe, when the first ideas for the game were being put together. And it's kind of like a living database of stuff that we have. In addition, once stuff is ready, I would say, it gets pulled from Google Drive or one of our artists, and then it gets either put into RTC as an asset. We have let's see, I think here, yeah, so we have a lot of stuff here, a lot of images, like all the profiles, all the 600 profiles or something. Their pictures are here, and all of the items as well that you can acquire in the game, that you can wear, that you can drink, that you can see on your desk. Yeah, there's oh yeah, there's some temporary stuff as well, some placeholders. But yeah, a lot of stuff is managed through Artisy, and then it's imported by Unity. And all the rest of the assets are just organized here inside Unity in the engine as prefabs. We have a simple system where we have things in a single scene. So most of the gameplay loop happens in the game scene. And then I have, sorry for the naming convention, I have a Unity game object class called game scene. And then these are each of the different scenes separately. So we have the bar scene, the bedroom scene. Oh, I love this. I still love that this exists. The bedroom scene or the mirror scene, the comic scene, which is an empty placeholder actually, because most of its logic is handled in another Unity scene. We have the elevator, that's its own entity. And then in the game, the chimneys cut off. And in the game, what happens is that we just activate or deactivate these scenes based on where the player is. And all of the art assets are organized here. So yeah, for example, going into the office, there's a button here and it has a background image. This whole thing is a background, etc. I think the grim office scene is the best scene to show, because due to ultra wide resolution monitors, we also needed to kind of extend the edges here and make it so that it would look like you have your own desk in the middle of like an office cubicle. And so we have these fake desks here that you can see the edge of only. Yeah, welcome to the joys of game development. That's basically it. Switch version. Yeah, the publisher handled the porting. They forked the project, but it's still connected to our repo. So we have an SVN repo, and they have a Git repo, and they just occasionally update their version whenever there's a bigger update. And then they build through their own pipeline. Yeah. Yeah. No problem, Marco. Thank you for coming. It was nice seeing you. Okay, if nobody has any more questions, then I would like to stop here. I'm gonna stop recording now.